I just want to say hello. Welcome to everybody this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are in the process. And if you're listening to this after it gets recorded and posted, welcome. I hope you enjoy the conversation. When I heard that I was going to be coming up to see Women in Data, I hadn't heard about the organization. And so I went out there and I looked, and I was incredibly impressed with the forward progress you guys have made as an organization. I think it's a wonderful focus. I think it's a wonderful topic. And I hope that what I have to share about being on a data team is going to be something that will enable you guys to do well in your careers as you move forward. I am actually going to blend the case study portion of the conversation into the overview presentation so that I'll talk about my experiences in three contexts. First of all, I work with clients worldwide on how to do data management and how to build data management teams in the context of a data strategy or a data governance engagement. Second, within IBM, I am the North American lead for the data strategy and governance practice. So I have built a community of practitioners who don't report to me that work together to help service clients around the world. And then finally, outside of IBM, I have had a relationship with the DAMA organization for almost 30 years. I have only been with IBM for 8. So it pre-exists my relationship with IBM. And I think it actually helped me get my relationship with IBM. So I'm going to be sharing with you how being involved in a nonprofit such as this can actually help you in the long term in your career. So can I just page down? Does that work? Here we go. Here's what we're going to do. Where we're going is we're going to actually look at the current context of data environment and understand what's going on from a modern data architecture perspective and why data is really coming to the forefront of the conversations that we're having right now. What I was saying earlier is that when I started in my career, data was truly an afterthought. People didn't talk about what the data was. They talked about the systems, they talked about the software, they talked about the business processes, but they didn't really talk about the data. I, of course, always had the perspective that the only reason you did business processes, systems, or bought hardware was because the data was the important thing. The reason for that is because I started with a company before they had a mainframe. I started with a company before they had a mini computer. I actually came in with personal computers, which is really scary. I taught them how to use Apple IIs. Look them up. It's a long time ago. And I got to know the people in the company that way. I got to understand their jobs, and I got to understand that as long as they had the data, they could do the work. And I think that's still the case, but I think it's in a much bigger context because the data comes from so many places now. It's not just data that you type in. It's data coming off of IoT devices. It's data that you're acquiring from other companies. This data is proliferating because even inside of a company, the same data may be stored 5, 10, 20 times. What I want to do after I talk about the context is talk about how you create leadership, culture, and an organization that's going to support carrying that data banner forward. Then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about different engagement model aspects, how diversity is very important within the data context, and then finally ending with my own perspective on continuous learning. It is incredibly critical that you keep your skills up to date. And so I thought that would be a good place to end the conversation. And I am good with interruptions. So if you want to ask a question here or there, that's fine. But because we're doing this with other people online, I think it would be best, unless it's like a really pressing issue and you can't hold it back, if we can wait until the end of the conversation, if you all are okay with that. I am a very informal speaker, and I'm going to start with the current context, and I'm going to start even before this context. I'm going to tell you why I care about data. And this is something that actually goes back, I can't even make this move. There. I was walking down a hall in my old job. There were two DBAs looking at data saying, well, obviously this is wrong. They looked at the data and they saw that there were two men with the exact same name at the same address, two women with the exact same name at the same address. Obviously, it was duplicate records. I'm like, well, let me see this. You can't just delete data in production, really. When I looked at the data, it was my neighbors 2 doors down from me. Father named the son after him. Mother got angry, named the daughter after her. They all 4 had a retirement plan with our financial services firm because the dad was a great German guy who, even though he made his 10 and 11-year-old daughter work cleaning out like the apartments that they rented, he started their retirement plan. So the reality of data is rarely what a technical person thinks it is. The reality of data has to be what business people know it is. And the knowledge of what that data is needs to be put in a place somewhere in your architecture that people will be able to find it. And what we found is that a lot of IT leaders are concerned about how they're going to connect the data from all of their systems on all of the clouds that they exist and make it coherent. There needs to be a way to move data back and forth between applications so that the final product, the final result set of what work they do can actually be used effectively to gain insights. And finally, they worry that people who are managing this data don't understand the risks that get introduced. So as data people, we have a lot of challenges that we have to help our employers work on. In all of my slides that I include, I'm including what the sources are so that you can go ahead out when you get a copy of the deck or a PDF, you'll be able to go back and find stuff. What we're seeing is that in the old days, transaction processing systems were what drove most of IT activity. Then over time, those transaction processing systems had information that was gathered together into something called a warehouse. And then that drove some of the digital enterprise work that was being done. Now what is happening is data that's not structured, data from all kinds of sources across the organization, memos, voice recordings, you name it, is all getting lumped into a cloud. And having that data connected in an appropriate way and documented in a way that you can actually find things is what needs to happen in order for that closed loop processing dream of saying, we did this process, how can we do this process better next time, has to happen. And so from a data team perspective, you really need to understand how to talk to people from the transaction sourcing systems, how to get data out of those sourcing systems and even those intermediate data warehouses, and then how to bring together the information from all of these really disparate kinds of sources, like whether you're bringing in information from emails and voice recordings and operational systems like your order entry system, plus your warehouse, and maybe there's information from a mart. And I can be very specific about this. If it's information about a customer who is in European Union or California, and that customer or citizen of the European Union or California wants to know what data you know about them, you have a legal obligation to be able to do this now. This requires a lot of data management coherence. And so that is why data management has really bubbled up to the forefront. It's a combination of external market pressures, like these regulations, the regulations that if you're a note taker kind of person, it's GDPR, CCPA. Those are the two regulations that are really driving a lot of the documentation requirements out of the data environment. At the same time, people are realizing that they're sitting on these huge storehouses of data that may have an incredible amount of value, and they're not getting as much value out of the data that they're sitting on. The term for that is called data monetization. And we're seeing a lot of pressure with companies to find new streams of income. And one of the kinds of new stream of income is to actually package the data that you have and use it in other ways. That may be reusing it inside your organization. That may be anonymizing it and selling it outside of your organization. Either way, nobody's going to buy your data if you can't explain what it is, you can't guarantee the quality, and you can't deliver it on a timely basis. So data management is what enables that whole process. When we talk about this cognitive enterprise where we've got a continuous feedback loop and we understand what's going on in all of the layers, there are a lot of things that we think about. And all of these things are things that need to be, to a certain extent, represented somewhere in the data team of your organization. Data team is not just an organizational unit. It's everybody in the company who touches the data, who uses the data, who may modify the data, who may report on the data. And so what you need to do if you're trying to create a coherent core data team in your company is you need to think about all of the producers and consumers of data and how you need to educate them so that they are doing right by this important new asset that companies are beginning to recognize. I will say this, it's not yet on the balance sheet. Data currently is an intangible. My belief is within the next 10 years, it will move from being an intangible to a tangible. Because at the point in time that a company goes out of business, goes into bankruptcy, if the right controls are not in place because of contractual obligations, the data from that company can be sold. And it drives accountants crazy when something has a value after bankruptcy, but it didn't have value during operations. So I don't think that the accountants are going to be able to stand it much longer. That's my personal belief. So let's talk about what you need to do as leaders, because I'm assuming every one of the people in this room, if you are not a data leader now, when you walk out of the room, you will think of yourself. If you take the time from your life to come to a meeting at this time of night, you have a passion for data. And if you have a passion for data, you need to advocate for it. And really, more than anything else, you need to speak the business language so the people in the business who need to fund work in the data space can understand that you bring value to the table. And so from a leadership perspective, IBM has done some very interesting research studies through an organization called the Institute for Business Value. The Institute for Business Value is kind of like a think tank internal to IBM. All of the information on the Institute for Business Value is available for free online, so you can just look the stuff up and download it and read through it when you want to go to sleep. Huge studies. This particular section on leadership came from 13,000 C-suite executives worldwide. And what we did is we crunched the numbers, looked at the responses to the surveys, and we bucketed leadership into 4 different areas. There are companies that are aspirational. There are companies that are building their data competency. There are companies that are exploring the different things that they can do with their data. And then there are companies that are really deriving high value from their data, and they have high integration of data management within all of the rest of the organization. And so if you think about yourself as a leader within the data organization, being able to speak to your business executives about the value managing your data brings, and about how you being involved early on in a project that may be creating new data, acquiring new data, changing the way data is being used, may allow you to put the tooling in place so that you have the data you need to work with for data science experiments or long-term data analytics product solutions. So you can't have good data analysis if you don't have good data. Actually, what I say when I'm doing my kind of pitches to clients is, if you put automation on bad data, that just makes bad things happen faster. It's the absolute truth. And you do not want your data management organization to be responsible for bad things happening faster. That's where the data ethics came in. That is a very important factor. You need to know that you're using the right data for the right purpose. As I talk through this, I can say that when I'm working with clients, I do see these four buckets. There are a lot of people that really, they want to do it, they just don't have the muscle. And so IBM comes in and helps them begin to build that muscle and put the formal structures in place. For organizations that have already started down that journey, usually you try and implement the data teams at least once or twice before you get it right. Because the first time people do it, they think they have to do it by the book. And then culture eats book smarts every day. I mean, you know, your corporate culture is going to make a difference. And so you have to re-swizzle what you plan on doing. You need to look at where you are in your company and where your company is in that progression, that maturity progression, and see whether you can help be the one to identify ways to improve the effectiveness of your data organization, how data is used in your organization, and how you as data professionals are viewed within your organization in terms of the value that you can provide.
Okay, I'm in meeting yet, 지금은.
Anybody who has a question? Well, we can go on mute. Okay, so exceptional results is what we're looking for. We're looking for giving our organization back more from the data that they have. And as leaders in the data environment, what I'm hoping that you'll do is look for opportunities where you can actually deliver this additional value by the work that you do. Now, from a inside IBM perspective, what we look for is we look for people who are really curious about the data that they have the opportunity to work with, and who take every chance that they have to look at that data and put it in a broader context so that they can see if there's some insight that can be gleaned. My personal belief, my background was actually as a data modeler and a DBA and a data architect. I spent 2 years, 3 years being a data modeler, and then one day I woke up and they told me that I was a DBA, and I said, whoa, that's going to be interesting. And I learned how to be a DBA like that night because I was on call. And then over the course of time, in the original company that I worked with, you'll look out on LinkedIn, you'll know which the asset management firm was. By the time I left that company after 28 years, I had worked on 95% of the systems in production, either developing the data structures or reviewing the developed data structures that people put in place or modifying the data structures. And so I really understood what was possible. And I found in many cases that when I went into conversations with the team, they didn't even know the functionality that already existed in the current data structures. And in many cases, they were building functionality on top of functionality that already existed. In other cases, I found that, you know, the new tools offered so many new opportunities to look at the data differently. You had to really have an appreciation of that balance between what currently exists and what new features and functions are possible using new tools and technologies. And you should never discount the knowledge that people have, because honestly, data documentation, pervasively, data documentation in most companies is insufficient to the kind of work that you guys want to do. Over the course of time, we're finding that there are ways that we can automate gathering data definitions, but in essence, the business users are going to know the most about their data. And you need to, however good you are at building your models, you really need to be good at having that conversation with the business user where you can elicit more information than you have documented, because that's where you're going to find that little grain of value. And especially in situations where you have data that's coming from very disparate sources, it's the confluence of that data where you find the most interesting insights, whatever they may be. In the data management community, the old example always was, why do they always have beer near the diapers? Well, when you're going out in the middle of the night and you gotta get diapers because you need them why not just pick up a six? It's the truth. It's those weird little insights that you have. I mean, there are car companies that know that, over the course of time, as one of the drivers pushes the seat back from the steering wheel, that means that there might be another person in that family soon. Little things that you don't even realize connect the dots. And the ethics that you learned about in your previous meeting are some of what you need to bring into those conversations. Is this something we should be doing with our data? Is this something that we can do with our data? Are we contractually obligated not to? So that's kind of my perspective on leadership. And as I said before, culture eats academics every day. It really does. The culture of an organization will make a huge impact on how a data team can be configured. One of the areas of culture, since this was a woman in data thing that I thought I would bring to bear here, is we did a thought leadership piece on women in leadership. And so I thought I would bring some of that information and share it with you. What we found is that there are still challenges in the workplace in terms of women having equitable representation at executive levels. Not all companies have those problems, but I think what you need to do is take a good hard look at what you see in your workplace and look for organizations where there are women at the top. Look for organizations where you know that there is representation across the board. And the reason this is important is honestly because the difference that you have in perspective on how you address problems, on how you influence the organization, on how you communicate, the more diversity there is in that data team that you're trying to build, the more likely it is that the message you're trying to give your company will be actually heard. Because the more perspectives that are in it, the more possibility is that a perspective that resonates with somebody will be there. So this particular study found that even though there are a lot of colleagues that feel like women have made progress, there's still progress to be made. And I honestly believe that there is a better split and better diversity in the data space than there is in the hardware space or the software space, because the data space is newer. All right. Hardware job, I mean, they're wireheads. I mean, like the people who do networking and the people who build hardware and the people who write software, that's from the 50s, 60s, 70s, primarily male dominant. And it's very, very, very interesting to watch what happens when women enter the operations department of an IT shop. And it's very, very interesting to me that in the data management world, most of the most visible voices in the data space, it's a split between men and women. It really is. It's nice because there's both of those perspectives. But don't be surprised if you're a woman on a team full of software developers that A, they're not going to care about data, and B, you're going to be the only woman in the room. I can say this, when I started at IBM 8 years ago, there were a lot of times where I was the only woman in the room. It's changed. It's changed a lot. And I was actually on a project where the project executive, the partner, the lead project manager, and I was the lead architect for data. We were all women. And we were like looking around the room going, oh my God, we need to go get a drink. Oh, we need to have champagne for this. So from the perspective of building a successful team, looking for that diversity and understanding that you might not always find it is really what I want to say to you. You need to be aware, and you need to be able to work in an environment that is not diverse in a way that is positive. So let's talk about the organization. Where I pulled this information from was a study about chief data officers. Chief data officer is a relatively new C-level seat. There aren't a lot of companies that have them. However, this year in the United States, there was a new law passed, and there is a directive that all state agencies will now have a chief data officer, which I thought amazed me because it's not actually happening on the private sector side yet. So the fact that the public sector's got this right just like confused me, because usually they're a follower, not a leader. But Obama actually did some really, really strong work on making data available. And for you as data scientists and data engineers, what you're always looking for is something that will enrich your data set. A lot of the data that is readily available on things like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Census Bureau is just, you can download it and use it, and it doesn't cost anything. So where I said the places of really interesting insights come from the confluence of unusual data, the government has actually made unusual data more readily available, which is really kind of interesting for you. But from a chief data officer perspective, there can be a lot of different configurations. We've seen CDOs report to CEOs. We've seen them report up into a CIO, not a chief investment officer, a chief information officer, because I know that there's a few of you from financial services who see CIO and think chief investment officer. And then, there's also a lot of times we'll see that the chief data officer reports into the chief operating officer or chief financial officer. And it just, different placement may have a different nuance to the business focus of the data organization. I will say this, it will change. Wherever your data organization is, it will move somewhere else about every 3 years. Over the past 20 years, you see it centralized, decentralized, in the line of business, in the enterprise level. We're going to outsource it. No, we're doing it all in-house. Let's make it a business function. No, IT has it. I mean, seriously. And here is my advice to you. Embrace that change and make friends every iteration. There was actually 3 years in my previous job where we had no data management organization, except everybody who used to be in the data management organization met for lunch twice a week. And we were like the guerrilla data organization until the next reorg. And the more that you build individual relationships with people in the technology department, in the legal department, in the operating officers, with the actual operations, with the DBAs, with the people who are the business analysts, the better your network will be to get the job that you want to get done in your company. Does that make sense? Okay. That's like one thing that I just feel very strongly about, because it's the relationships you build with other people in your organization that will make you more successful and more of a go-to person to get data work done. And that's the position you want to be at. You want to be in a position where there are 4 or 5 people saying, I really need, Mickey Mouse on my team, because they always come up with something really good. in the data management organizations that I help create in clients, we look for people that are those linchpins that may not necessarily be in IT, may not necessarily be together. And we look for them because they're the ones that have the most credibility. Because you can have the best model in the world that comes up with the most wonderful insight. And if you don't have the right credibility and you don't have the right network, it can die on the vine. And that is just sad. It's because it's so much value that you could be giving to your customer. It's so much value you could be giving to your employer. It's so much value you could be giving to the people that you work with, whatever kind of model it is that you're building. So having those relationships and taking the time to go to lunch and have coffee and do all that really is a critical part of building a successful data team. Think of it as data marketing. Okay, go back, get your marketing book, and remember how to build relationships. So each of the organization structures aligns differently. Sometimes integration is more aligned to the IT side. Sometimes market innovation is when you're more on the chief financial officer end because they're looking for more money out of the data. It will just shift back and forth. And there's a lot of interesting information about how the chief data officer can play in each of the ends of these spectrums. So what we do know is that when we're doing strategy engagements, we usually see a very heavy split on soft skills rather than hard skills. And then when you get down into the actual analytics delivery engagements, it tends to be more of a focus on the hard skills than the soft skills. And when I say soft skills, I especially mean data storytelling. It is important for you not just to be able to deliver a really nice dashboard. It's important for you to be able to create a story that resonates with whoever you're trying to have use that dashboard so that it becomes real to them. That story that I gave you about, why you can't delete data in production, I used that very effectively for 20 years. I'm like, you could have deleted my neighbor's son. It's a really good point. So find the story that's going to work in your company. And let's talk about engagement and execution now. Artificial intelligence, the killer app for data. Where they come up with the names of these studies, I do not know, but that is a really good name because it's the truth. AI, machine learning, finding those insights in the data is where the sweet spot is right now. Trying to find a way to automate your environment so that the computer can do the heavy lifting. IBM actually, for a fair amount of time, has been talking about AI not being artificial intelligence so much as augmented intelligence, where the robotics side of it and the machine learning side of it gets rid of the repetitive work so that people can focus their energy on the creative work. There is a statistic that for a data scientist, almost 79%, this is like from Harvard Business Review, almost 79% of their time is spent collecting, inferring meaning, and cleansing data, and only less than 25% of their time, like 21% of their time, is spent getting their insights. That means if you build a data environment with a good data architecture, you can get 4 times the amount of creativity out of your most expensive data resources. Yep. There is a question. I will repeat it. Go ahead.
How can they realize what kind of skill actually from that? Wouldn't even be a scientist or a data engineer, because I feel like that exercise is, I don't think organizations are doing that exercise before they hit spend on that job.
I think that there is a lot of confusion about many of these different job families. Actually, I was just quoted in U.S. News and World Report because the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out what the hot jobs are. And believe it or not, they said the number 5 hot job out there in technology is being a DBA. Say what? So they actually believe that DBA is the head of the job family of data. They haven't quite caught up with the fact that there is a chief data officer, a chief data architect, a chief analytics officer, a chief analyst, a data scientist, a data engineer, a data integration architect, a data integration developer, a data visualization specialist, a data modeler. All of those are viable roles within large organizations. Now, all of those roles may be 3 people, depending on your size of your company, but those skill sets are very varied. And depending on the background of the organization, they may not know enough to distinguish between the skill sets. One of the specialty areas that I work in is in data governance, which means I on top of all of those things that I just listed, there's a data owner, a data steward, a data administrator. There is a data governance specialist. There are people who specialize in data policy writing. There are people who are data quality specialists, data quality analysts. You need to have somebody who understands that data team space and all of those data team roles. This is where I will say, if you take a look at the DAMA Data Management Body of Knowledge, it is publicly available. You can get it on Amazon. It costs like $54. It's like the price of a textbook. There are some examples of what each of those roles are there. And so that is an interesting place to start. And the body of knowledge has nothing to do with IBM, but IBM does use it. At least we use it in all of my engagements because I need people. The value here is that if you understand what all the roles are, you'll be able to pick the right resources. But like I said, every data organization I know goes through multiple iterations until they really get the right configuration for the kind of work they're going to do. And because companies are not static and they change the kind of work they're going to do, it is a continuous reinvention exercise, which is really difficult for some people who think that they should just come in and, they've got their job and they've got their, you have to be a little bit more flexible and agile than that. So, from an engagement model perspective, what I recommend is focusing on business value, focusing on the current priorities, and then understanding the dependencies that will allow you to achieve those priorities. And the way that we actually look at it is we look at the strategy, the why, the data. There is no AI without data. The execution, which really means like don't just do experiments, eventually get to the point where it goes to production. Because there are a lot of companies that spend a lot of money doing nothing else but experiments, and they never actually harden those models and start implementing them. It takes for a company's culture to shift from using data to validate a decision they've already made to using data to inspire a decision that needs to be made. And what you as a strong data team need to do is take the perspective of you are continually educating and lifting up the data literacy of your organization. So at IBM, whoa, sorry about that. At IBM, we do have a data governance framework that we use. And when we're looking at an organization, we want to understand how in each of these areas, how effective and how mature an organization is. And then what we do is make recommendations for each of these areas, how the company can mature to the next level or to the level that they need to reach their strategic goals. Everybody has a maturity framework. We have a maturity framework. It's very similar to CMMI. This is a framework we've been using for more than 18 years with data related topics and data governance. IBM is one of the organizations that really started having a data governance council, and did it well before many others. There's a guy who created the Data Governance Council. It was primarily financial services and healthcare and insurance organizations because they were the industries that had the most regulation. And it's interesting that the more regulation there is in an industry, the more governance there tended to be. So finally, let's get down to diversity. What I'm sharing with you is that we have a thought leadership area called Be Equal. And the way that we look at equality is we look at equality on two levels. Equality of the individuals in the organization, but within the data context, the way I look at it is also looking for equality in the way that you actually select the data you use for your experiments. Because if you have a very, very homogeneous group of data management professionals or data people who are picking and selecting your sample sets, you will have homogeneous sample sets that are skewed and biased. And so one of the main reasons you really, really need to see a lot of diversity in your data teams is so that when you get to the point you're actually working in the data, you are looking for those nuances in the data that are broad. It's always the case that 80% of the data is pretty much the same and 20% of the data has most of the changes and differences. One of the challenges is that 80% of the data that is pretty much the same is usually the low-hanging fruit that application development staff goes for on their minimum viable product. I count on my data people to say you can't leave out the data in making the decisions on what is in scope for a minimum viable product. A lot of times data is considered a non-functional requirement. And I believe that somebody wearing the data hat has to be having a seat at the table when a project is put together. And whether the person wearing that data hat is a data architect or a data owner or a steward or the reporting analyst or the data scientist, there has to be somebody there that says, we need a strong set of test data. We need a diverse set of test data. So I'm asking you to not only look at the diversity of your organization in terms of the people that you're working with so that you have lots of perspective, but also in terms of what those people and their diversity do to the data sets that you work on. Because if the data set is not holistic, you might get skewed results in the models that you build. So there actually is a toolkit that we have out there. It's open source. It's called Removing Bias. And you can get to it. The link is there. And so you can just go out there and look at what we have in terms of, I thought I'd share that with you so that you can take it back with you and leverage it. And finally, how am I doing on my time? Okay, great. Continuous learning. So you've seen that the technologies and the tools have changed over time. We've gone from an organization where most of the data is coming in through transactional models to building that kind of digital enterprise where you've got, the warehouses and the, more focused digital data outputs, and then finally getting up to the cognitive enterprise. Each of these different iterations have required a different skill set. At IBM, we actually reevaluate the people that we have in our services area pretty much every year. We have a minimum of 40 hours of training that we have to do every year. They allow us that time. I will say this, the people who are really successful, 40 doesn't begin to cover it. I think this past year I had 180 hours because I got creative on how I continuously learn. When I don't feel like getting up in the morning, I listen to a TED Talk. When I don't feel like thinking really hard, I watch a master class instead of zoning out in front of Hallmark. Anytime that you are in front of a screen, you have a choice. You can just be entertained, or you can be entertained and learn at the same time. On the way up here, I was listening to a book that was by an astronaut. It's the guy who was in the, he didn't go in the moon. His name is Michael Collins. He was the astronaut that stayed in space. And listening to the amount of data and the way that they use data in the 60s is fascinating to me. I mean, I watched Hidden Figures. It was just incredibly good because it gave me a sense of where we were, and then I think about where we are now. And I think about the fact that there's online courses that people don't have to pay for. There is a tremendous amount of resource out there. Personally, I listen to books on tape all the time because I'm always on some airplane somewhere. I put my headset in and that's what I do. But it is a problem of epic proportion because we have got a lot of people in the workplace that are not continuous learners, that are at a point in their career where they don't want to jump on that learning bandwagon. And so if I can ask you to do anything, build into the way that you do your work, learning something new every month, even if it's something little. And what I say to the people that I mentor is that even if you're on a project where you really don't like the work that you're doing, because it's not 100% what you want, you could be learning and honing your soft skills, because the soft skills are just as important as the hard skills. So, take every opportunity to find something on a project that you're working on that will allow you to get better at the next project you get assigned to. And I guarantee you, you will never have a problem getting that next assignment because everybody will know that you're willing not only to do the work that you need to do, but you're getting ready for the work that's coming down the line. So keeping a really, really strong eye on what's going on in the marketplace from a tools and technologies perspective is very important, and refreshing the skills that you have and share your knowledge. I think one of the best things that we ever did as an organization in my first company was, we started like a book club, and we would read like these technical books and we'd be quizzing each other and, find a way to make it fun. Gamify it if you can. At IBM, we use badging, and we actually have gone down the road of most of what we have is associated to a badge, and we're trying to get people to move up that badging level and get to the elite level, and they get the little garnishes on their badges if they do these extra 20 hours. It works. I mean, everybody likes gold stars, right? We all went to kindergarten. And finally, from a key imperatives perspective, really, organizations are trying to future-proof their workforce because the companies are going to change. They're going to change because there's market pressure. They're going to change because what it is that they do and sell is maybe no longer of interest in the marketplace. And so companies are continually reinventing themselves. That means employees need to continually reinvent themselves. And I think as a data team, if you want to be a truly successful data team, you need to embrace that continuous change and that continuous learning. You need to look for the diversity. You have to recognize that you're going to be reorged because it's just going to happen. Nobody knows what to do with data. We're still very young. I mean, software and hardware have had more concrete practices, but they're still young. When you look at data management, when I look at data management, I think of library sciences. It's been around for thousands of years. If you want to talk about taxonomy, go to medicine. Look how long the biology taxonomy has been out there. We're not even hitting 3 digits. So we still have a lot of learning to go.